Let me tell you a story that will completely rewrite everything you think you know about classical music. A story of betrayal, jealousy, power, and a genius who was slowly erased while he was still alive. This is not a gentle tale about a polite, red-haired priest writing pretty violin concertos. No. This is the dark, uncomfortable truth. How Antonio Vivaldi, one of the greatest musical minds in human history, was pushed out of society, stripped of dignity, and left to die in absolute poverty, buried in an unmarked grave like he never existed. And the most shocking part? The very institutions that once celebrated him were the same ones that destroyed him. If you think you know Vivaldi, you don't, not until you hear this. If you want more stories like this, the hidden crimes, the buried truths, the dark side of the greatest composers who shaped our world, make sure you subscribe right now. Don't let these forgotten voices fade again. Hit that subscribe button because the next story is even darker. Antonio Vivaldi was born in Venice on a windy March day in 1678. The bells of San Giovanni in Bregora were ringing wildly because the earth had just shaken. An earthquake struck Venice moments after his birth, and his mother, terrified that her newborn would die, rushed him to the church to be baptized on the very same day. Some say this is why Vivaldi's music always sounded like a storm, because he was born into one. But no one could have predicted that this fragile child, struggling for breath, would later ignite the musical world, and then be abandoned by it so completely that he would die in a rented attic, penniless and forgotten. From childhood, Antonio suffered from chronic chest tightness, which many historians believe was either severe asthma or a heart defect. His breathing was so labored that walking across a room exhausted him. He would stop in the middle of sentences, clutching his chest, gasping for air. And still, inside this weak body burned a fierce, uncontrollable passion: the violin. By the age of 10, he could play with such fire that older musicians stared in disbelief. The boy seemed to conjure storms with his bow. People whispered that he had a demon inside him. Others said it was an angel. In Venice, people always had an opinion. Antonio's father, Giovanni Battista, recognized his son's genius early. Giovanni himself was a barber who became a violinist, playing at San Marco, one of Europe's most prestigious basilicas. He took Antonio under his wing, dragging the boy to performances, rehearsals, and tavern concerts. The father was strict, demanding perfection, but he was also the first and last person who truly protected Antonio. Later in life, when Antonio's enemies attacked him, when the church turned against him, when patrons abandoned him, Giovanni Battista was no longer alive. His death, in many ways, marked the beginning of Antonio's long descent. At 15, Antonio began studying for the priesthood, not because he felt a calling, but because it was a practical way to secure education and status. And at 25, he was ordained a priest. They called him Il Prete Rosso, the red priest, for the copper color of his hair. But the priesthood didn't fit him. He struggled to perform Mass because his breathing problems forced him to stop and leave abruptly, sometimes mid-ceremony. Parishioners complained. Rumors grew. Eventually, he was released from priestly duties, officially because of his illness, unofficially because Antonio cared more about music than rituals. And everyone could see it. He would leave the altar and run straight to his violin. It wasn't appropriate, it wasn't dignified, but it was Antonio. He found refuge at the Ospedale della Pietà, a Venetian orphanage for abandoned girls, and one of the greatest musical institutions in Europe. The girls were trained for years, becoming elite performers who stunned audiences behind wooden screens hidden from view. Vivaldi composed hundreds of pieces for them, concertos, cantatas, and sacred works, and he demanded perfection. He pushed the girls relentlessly, making them repeat the same passage until their fingers bled. But he also loved them, not romantically, but musically, spiritually. They were his orchestra, his voice. He crafted their sound the way a sculptor carves marble. And people loved his music. Travelers from across Europe wrote letters describing how the Pietà girls performed with such precision and emotion that audiences wept. Vivaldi became a sensation. His fame spread beyond Venice, to Rome, to Amsterdam, to Vienna. His publisher in Amsterdam, Estienne Roget, made his music available to all of Europe, something rare at the time. Vivaldi became one of the first internationally distributed composers in history. But not everyone celebrated him. His confidence, arrogance, flamboyant personality, and theatrical style created enemies. The Venetian establishment was conservative, political, and deeply hierarchical. Vivaldi did not respect hierarchy. He argued with officials, dismissed traditional forms, refused to follow rules. And then there was Anna Giro, the young singer who traveled with him for years. Anna was talented but fragile, learning from Vivaldi like a daughter or a muse. But society saw scandal. They whispered that Vivaldi lived with her, that she slept in his house, that she replaced God in his life. Whether the rumors were true doesn't matter. In Venice, rumors were poison, and Antonio drank them daily. By his mid-40s, Vivaldi was producing operas, a genre filled with money, ambition, and political rivalries. He fought with impresarios, singers, and rival composers. Sometimes he won. Sometimes he was banished from theaters. One theater banned him for refusing to let a mediocre singer perform his work. Another accused him of moral impropriety. Others mocked his endless stream of concertos, claiming he wrote too fast. One critic famously said, "Vivaldi wrote the same concerto 500 times. Today, we understand that he invented the modern concerto. They mocked him for creating what everyone else would later copy." But as Vivaldi soared higher, Venice grew colder. A powerful faction in the city saw him as a threat to tradition. They disliked his fame, his independence, his personality. Venice was a society of stability. No one liked someone who changed the rules, and Vivaldi broke rules every day. When his biggest patron, Marquis Guido Bentivoglio, died, Vivaldi lost the political protection he desperately needed. The enemies who had waited in silence now struck. His contracts were cancelled. His salary was reduced, his proposals rejected, his operas sabotaged. Suddenly, everywhere he turned, doors shut in his face. Meanwhile, Europe changed. A new musical taste emerged, led by composers like Johann Adolf Hasse, and early classical styles that favored elegance over energy. Vivaldi's passionate, fiery style began to sound outdated. His operas were ignored, his concertos dismissed. Students now preferred newer trends. Patrons sought different composers. Vivaldi, once the king of Venetian music, was now treated as a stubborn relic. He tried to revive his career. He traveled across Italy, Verona, Mantua, Ferrara, seeking new opportunities. Some welcomed him. Others rejected him. The Bishop of Ferrara personally banned him from entering the city, claiming a priest associated with a female singer was scandalous. This devastated Vivaldi. He had written operas specifically for Ferrara's theater. Now everything fell apart. His fragile health worsened. His financial problems deepened. He grew anxious, restless, exhausted. And yet, he continued to write. Even in despair, he composed music that burned with energy. But the world had stopped listening. In 1740, defeated by Venice and abandoned by patrons, Vivaldi made a final desperate decision to leave the city where he was born, where he achieved greatness, where he lost everything. He traveled to Vienna, hoping to work under Emperor Charles VI, his devoted admirer. Years earlier, the emperor had praised him personally, calling him the greatest master of the violin. Vivaldi believed Vienna would offer him stability and respect. He was wrong. Shortly after Vivaldi arrived, Emperor Charles VI died suddenly. The entire imperial court froze its spending. Musicians were dismissed. Payments suspended. Foreign composers, especially elderly ones with no connections, were ignored. Vivaldi, who had spent his last savings traveling to Vienna, now had nothing. No patron, no income, no place in the new court. He ended up renting a small attic room at a cheap inn called Zum Widder, known as a place where poor musicians stayed. He sold manuscripts, some at humiliatingly low prices, just to survive. He composed a few small pieces for local events, but his fame was gone. He was an old man in a young city. The asthma attacks intensified. He could barely breathe while climbing the stairs. Walking outside exhausted him. He grew thinner, weaker, quieter. And yet, even in his final months, he continued writing music, because music was the only part of his life that never betrayed him. But poverty crushed him. He had no money for medicine, no patrons to protect him, no family to care for him. And Venice, the city he transformed with his music, never reached out to help. In July 1741, Antonio Vivaldi died from what the official register called internal inflammation, likely pneumonia or heart failure. He was 63. His death went unnoticed by the city. There were no crowds, no ceremonies, no honor. He was buried in a communal grave for the poor, unmarked, undocumented, erased. His manuscripts scattered, his name faded. His music disappeared from concert halls. Within a generation, no one spoke of him. So who was responsible? The Venetian authorities, who undermined him for decades. The conservative elite who spread rumors and sabotaged his career. The political shifts that left him unprotected. The change in musical tastes that declared him obsolete. The rival composers who envied him. The patrons who abandoned him. The emperor who died too soon. The world that forgot him. The illness that tormented him. The system that never protected musicians. But history has a strange sense of justice. In the 20th century, nearly 200 years after his death, researchers discovered hundreds of his lost manuscripts in a monastery and in a private collection. Slowly, the world realized the truth. Vivaldi was not a minor composer. He was a giant, a pioneer, a genius who invented the concerto form, inspired Bach, influenced generations, and shaped the sound of the Baroque era. The man who died forgotten is now one of the most performed composers in human history. His city abandoned him. His era dismissed him. But time resurrected him. Vivaldi lost everything in life, but in death he won immortality. And that is how one of humanity's brightest composers was silenced, forgotten, and erased, until history accidentally rediscovered him centuries later. Antonio Vivaldi never saw justice. He never knew that his music would one day shake stadiums, dominate playlists, and become a cultural icon across the planet. He died believing he was a failure, while the world he dreamed of conquering simply wasn't ready for him. But now you know the truth. You know who betrayed him, who benefited from his fall, and how a genius was buried without honor, only to rise from the dead through his music. If you want more stories from the dark side of classical music, the real stories they never teach in school, tell me, and I'll open the next chapter.